Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Say! It's Miller time! Welcome once again to Miller Time, where we look at the growing insanity and awful works of comic book writer Frank Miller. Now, in our last session, we saw Frank's most recent work with Batman, and how he has lost his mind on how the character, or writing in general, is supposed to work. After seeing some of those script excerpts, you're probably wondering how in the hell Frank Miller could possibly have gotten away with this nonsense. But like I said before, Frank Miller has had a history of really great stories, so let's talk for a moment about The Dark Knight Returns. Bear in mind that before the mid-1980s, the popular consciousness of Batman was shaped by the Adam West TV series. Sure, in the comics world, that image had been dead for years, but up until 1985, if you asked somebody who had never read a comic book in their life about Batman, they'd say, "Yeah, bat shark repellent, right?"
Hand me down the shark repellent bat spray!
But in 1985, Frank Miller wrote The Dark Knight Returns. In preparation for this review, I reread The Dark Knight Returns, and it's still pretty damn good. It tells the story of a future where Batman retired after the death of Jason Todd, Superman is a tool of the US government, crime has overrun Gotham City, and the mass media seem to be the most prevalent aspect of our lives, with news programs having talking heads that drone from story to story without real substance and spew soulless diatribes. But that'd never happen in today's society, right? And in this dark future, Bruce Wayne decides he needs to step back into the role of Batman and show the criminal world who has the real power in the city. Now, it's still an epic story and really well written, but there's a lot wrong with it too. Frank Miller should have just kept this a straightforward Batman story, but instead he felt the need to comment on the mass media, Reagan, the rehabilitation of criminals, talk shows, the freaking Cold War? What does a Cold War have to do with Batman? But anyway, despite the flaws, it's at its heart a story of an old man who reclaims his former glory and saves the city he loves. The coloring, the murkier look, and the angular proportions, it all is genuinely there to help set the mood. And of course, in 2001, we had to have a terrible sequel. So let's dig into The Dark Knight Strikes Again, Part 1. Okay, I admit, I'm a sucker for this kind of cover. I couldn't tell you what it is about the idea of a fist that makes it an enduring symbol, especially since it can be used either to show resistance or oppression, but there's just something pure and iconic about it that I love. Made better is that it's Batman, baby! You don't get more iconic than that! Hey kids, spoilers! Batman doesn't even really appear in this thing until the very end of it! And this thing's supposed to be about him! Also, for some reason this comic's abbreviation is DK2. What's wrong with DKSA? It's not like the original was just called Dark Knight. If you wanted to point out that it's a sequel to The Dark Knight Returns, then it'd be TDKR2. Otherwise, it just looks like you're talking about Donkey Kong. Anyway, on to the actual book. By the by, if you're expecting a rage-filled review of this with lots of shouting bits, you're probably going to be a bit disappointed. Today, we're putting on our brainy specs and doing analysis, like I was a real reviewer instead of some loser who does video reviews of comic books on the internet. We open to Batman's narration over a series of news footage, including Sinead O'Connor as a newswoman, someone mildly resembling George W. Bush, a pair of lips, and a middle-aged Jimmy Olsen. Goody! Jimmy Olsen! I can't wait for the romance subplot involving a bug lady. Basically, the Bush stand-in, President Rickard, is giving the State of the Union while Jimmy Olsen rebuts every statement. Basically, we have the comic book equivalent of a mainstream news channel combined with friggin' C-SPAN. You know, if I wanted to watch Keith Olbermann, though I can't imagine why I'd ever want to, I'd watch Keith Olbermann. I really don't need this kind of thing in my superhero escapism. This is something you're going to have to get used to in this comic, by the way. Like I said earlier, in The Dark Knight Returns, Miller had lots of satire of the mass media in place, but while I personally felt it was distracting and unnecessary, it did help to paint a picture of the kind of culture Batman was returning to. The satire took a backseat to the plot. But in this comic, it's the opposite. Much of the plot takes a backseat to the satire. Why, here's a spiffy example. There's an advertisement for banking services that uses lots of sexual innuendo and a naked woman covered up by dollar bills. Ha! Isn't it just so true how many investment firms use sex to sell their services? Wait, what? And in a rare case of art imitating art, that awesome iconic fist from the cover has been turned upside down, like any hope of this being truly awesome is plummeting downwards. What happened to them? Where are they? Where are our heroes? So, in other words,
I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night.
we cut to a scene of a naked, muscular man in a beard fighting inhuman monsters. Ah, nuts. Steve! Frank's been writing 300 again! Did he get his pills? No, actually, as we soon learn, this is Ray Palmer, the Atom, who's living inside a petri dish. Apparently he's been there so long that he's mostly forgotten his humanity. And as such, the melodramatic narration has a bit of power behind it, and it doesn't come off as pretentious twaddle. I know, I keep being really fair to this comic. Well, maybe I was wrong about this comic. Maybe it's not all that bad. Oh, look, Carrie Kelly in a cheetah print catsuit, and on this panel her head is bobblehead huge. Never mind, false alarm. This is crap. Another quick history lesson. In The Dark Knight Returns, Carrie Kelly was a teenage girl who, inspired by Batman, took up the mantle of Robin. She did what any good Robin did, bring some youthful energy and backup to Batman's more scowly existence. For some ungodly reason, Frank Miller has decided to change her from Robin to the idiotic moniker of Catgirl. Which, knowing anime, you'd think would at least give us something nice to look at, or at least the heterosexual males in the audience, but just look at this! Even though she's only 16 years old, Carrie's got massive collagen injections into her lips and huge ridiculous ears. Now, purportedly, she became Catgirl to honor Selena Kyle's memory, but I don't remember Catwoman ever running around looking like Chester Cheetah. And to compound the crappy artwork, we also barely have any backgrounds. Not that I think they'd be drawn any better, but that's something else you should get used to in this mess. As the alarm sounds, Ray Palmer shrinks down to a more manageable size, and Carrie, since I refuse to call her Catgirl, commands her shoes, "Chucks, give me wheels!" So in other words, go go gadget Chuck Taylors! Stop it! Don't think like a loser. You are not toast. Kid, you're not even a waffle. Several guards dressed in silly postal worker hats chase after the two, and we see the first signs of the Torgo syndrome we'd see in All-Star Batman and Robin. Though, again, in the interest of fairness, this actually makes sense, since she's in a stressful situation and she's a teenage girl unsure of herself, as opposed to Vicky Vale figuring out how best to push up her boobs to attract Bruce Wayne. Oh, just to confound this nonsense, Carrie tells Ray to shrink down to aspirin size and actually tosses him in her mouth. Wow, that's like 6 different kinds of gross. Essentially, it's because she needs to use her hands, but I think it's rather... Wait, what the hell? What the Flying Dutchman is up with this background? Is this 2001 A Space Odyssey all of a sudden? So she apparently leaps off a building, not that I could tell with the lack of backgrounds, and accidentally swallows Ray, forcing her to hurl. How charming. As the news comments on this in hilarious satire, we learn that the USA is under martial law and that the government is blaming foreign powers for taking Palmer. Well, of course, they don't say that it was Ray Palmer, they say it was a biological weapon. This is going to turn into that stupid plot cul-de-sac from the V for Vendetta movie where they said the government manufactured a terrorist plot, isn't it? Superman is quite unhappy with this news. Bruce, you maniac! You damn fool! What the hell are you doing? Oh yes, this is something we didn't get into during All-Star Batman and Robin, nor something I often comment on in comics. Weird emphasis on words. It's you! I know it's you! Nobody else could be so good at being crazy! You know, Frankie, emphasizing random words does not a talented writer make! This wasn't the deal! This wasn't the deal! What deal? At the end of Dark Knight Returns, he faked his death, you heard his heartbeat, and winked at him. When the hell did you cut a deal with him? Anywho, Superman exposits that he's been trying to negotiate for Ray Palmer's release, and because of Bruce's behavior, it continues to put people's lives at risk. Yeah, I know I'm commenting on a lot of seemingly little things, but that's the rub, isn't it? The few good parts of this comic are buried under the building tower of every tiny little thing that sucks about this book until it all topples over into a huge pile of fail. So let's get back to Satire Comic guest starring Batman. It's time for News in the Nude. Get it? Because news programs have women dressing more and more provocatively. Wait, what? And if you'll allow me to steal Yahtzee's bit for a minute, I'm sure there's going to be some Frank Miller fan who rolls their eyes at this and tries to tell me, Linkara, you handsome but completely inept dickweed, Miller is making commentary on the increasing amount of sexuality in the mass media, particularly the exploitation of the female form, and you should be applauding him for wanting to take on a subject giving your own feminist views. To which I respond, what the pluperfect hell does that have to do with Batman? And even if this was some sort of clever commentary, perhaps he should have disguised it behind something more plausible, because I can assure you that outside of the Playboy channel, the FCC is going to have a teensy bit of a problem with a show called News in the Nude. And what sort of commentary is it exactly? That in the future, the news programs will be so desperate for ratings that they'll put naked women out to make sexual innuendos while shouting, hey, look at my boobs? It doesn't say anything, it's just there. You want to know why there are only a few T&A comics out there these days when they seem to be a lot more prevalent in the 80s or 90s? Or why fan service shots in comics get annoyed scoffs and eye rolls from the majority of fans? I mean, besides for their pointless stupidity? It's because of the internet! We don't need to get our jollies from seeing silhouettes of naked women in our sequential art, because half a dozen artists across the web have done hardcore porn of it already! And this was made in 2001. While the internet does apparently play a part in this book, they couldn't have predicted the rise of YouTube or sites like it, or even full-scale web shows of reviews of nostalgic material or actual news programming, so clearly it's not some internet-based nude show. So if you're wondering why I've spent a minute of your time ranting about this, allow me to make it clear. Frank Miller just wanted to draw naked women! So, by the way, in 25 pages, what have we accomplished plot-wise? Well, Carrie rescued the Atom, well, whoop-de-dumbass, and oh, I guess Superman saved his shuttle, but the only point of that was to set up the News in the Nude segment, and to establish that Superman's getting weaker with age. Now, here's an actual decent scene, one of the few in this book. Carrie goes to Ray Palmer and apologizes for, you know, throwing him up. However, Ray tells her that she